And it's a very good afternoon to the Sportsfan Radio panel. And ladies and gentlemen, there is a heap to talk about today. And after I sent the agenda out, I had the misfortune of watching St Kilda surrender a 36-point lead. Judge, I can say one thing, and I can probably speak for Coutta when I say this, that having been a Melbourne supporter, I've seen enough of that over the last 50 years. I know what you're going through. Just what did you make of it all?
It's that what's becoming a real bedevilment of the club, Professor. That it's our kicking. It's not that we can't get the ball. It's not that we haven't got a decent structure. Highmore, new player, did well. Our back line's actually going well. The forward line is just a shambles. And the thing is, we get these leads. I think we had a 6 or 7 goal lead at one stage, and they were at half time. Any decent club would not let that lead go. So it's as we've always said, Professor, the game's played between the ears, and that is a classic example. Jack Higgins you just look at him. He's a shattered man. He's just got no confidence. I'd say the same for Max King. There are some promising signs, Professor, but gee, we've actually gone way back from last year, and I'll just give the best comparator as the Bulldogs. They're flying, and we beat them in a final last year. So that's just black and white where we're at. Not good.
Where do you think this season's going to finish up by the time you get to the end of the year?
Oh, look, probably bottom 4, possibly bottom 5. If we kick-straight the last couple of games, we'd either be in the 8 or knocking on the door.
Yeah,
so that's how tight the season is, of course. But good teams realise that and put the hammer down. When you've got a team that hasn't scored any score in the first quarter and virtually nothing, 2 goals at half time, I mean, really, any other side worth its salt would have put that game away.
When you said, Judge, the problem's the kicking, is that like a chef saying there's a problem with my cooking?
Oh, absolutely.
Isn't that the main ingredient? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and you mentioned, Paul, that Greg Baum did an article yesterday in The Age, and he's one of my favourite journos, and he nailed it. What's happening, but it's not peculiar to St Kilda. And I know that Max King would like to get Matthew Lloyd to show him how to kick. He doesn't need to know how to kick. He knows how to kick. He's actually got a terrific style, but I can only put it down to the mental element, Paul, and I just don't know what's going on there. I've got to tell you, I wouldn't be Brett Ratton for all the tea in China. He must be thinking, what the hell have I done going to this mob? I've heard they were cursed. I've heard they're just, so far away from premiership, and here we are.
Reminds me of that Greg Chappell quote, I'm batting really well, I just keep getting out. So
just not getting it.
There's something wrong there.
Yeah.
Judge, was it more the way that they just surrendered a 7-goal lead? And like that last quarter, they didn't look as if they could get it in the forward line. They had so many people back, but it was just a matter of time coming. Adelaide were just attacking, and St Kilda just, I don't know, surrendered.
I don't get their defensive mentality, Gelding. It looks like, okay, we're 7 goals up, or 6 goals, something it was, 36 points. Now we'll protect the lead. It's sort of almost a soccer mentality. But I agree. They had the whole team for the last quarter virtually in the back line. Yeah. And I also noticed, and perhaps other sides do it, I follow the Saints more than other clubs. The fullback kicks out. He kicks out to 36 players. You ever notice that after a point? Yep. It just seems to me you've got all of this real estate down the middle and down the right-hand side or left-hand side, whichever way it is, open. Why not drop a torp down the guts, make it a 50-50, but a chance for a goal, rather than just send it straight into chaos, which you don't have the wherewithal to get it out and score goals. Guess what's going to happen? It's just going to come straight back, and they're going to score.
But that was the last quarter, wasn't it? Like you would get it up to the half forward line, you would go through all that chaos, get it there, and Adelaide had 2 or 3 players just sitting back, and you just kick it to them.
Yep.
And as the commentators said, all they had to do was score 1 or 2 goals, or you know,
Yep.
you know, they had the lead to settle it down. But they seem to have, as you said, 18 players in their back half, just trying to, we've kicked enough, we'll save the game.
It might surprise you. I used to work with a very connected Hawks he might have been a board member, but he actually wasn't a fan of Clarkson because he said there were so many games they'd lost, they just didn't go for the jugular. Whereas to me, as an outsider, I thought Clarkson goes for the jugular more than a tiger python. But that's and it's similar to in soccer. They say that the most dangerous score is 2-0. Yeah, because you can pull back and you think you're home, and you probably was in the 2-0 scenario there. You just got rolled over.
I suppose, Paul, the problem with that game was that was St Kilda's win. That was a game they would have marked as a win at the start of the year, probably against Adelaide. And they'd done enough. They were 7 goals plus up. All they had to do was keep playing the same brand of football. And it's a potential, you know, between 5 and 10 goal win. They've managed to turn into a 1-goal defeat.
As a racing man, Gelding, what were they? How many lengths ahead in the straight were they?
Oh, they did a Scotch and dry. They were 40 lengths in front coming around the turn of Flemington.
And they're in the grandstand.
Professor, this is what Melbourne has been doing, where they're in front, and every Melbourne supporter thinks, here we go again. And then the other side catches up, and then Melbourne gets the wobblies. Well, that's what's happening to us. And you have to agree, it's a mental thing. There's no question that we've got good players. Although I've got to say, our bottom 4 players, and I won't name them, but they are terrible. And unfortunately, they keep getting games. And I would seriously get rid of them just for the sake of not having terrible players in our team and blooding some new players, which other sides seem to be doing.
All right, Judge, we might cut it off there. We'll go from a tale of
vote one, Professor. Vote 1 for the judge to get on the St Kilda board.
What I would say though, Professor, is maybe they move from Seaford to Moorabbin. Maybe they need to move to St Kilda. Better coffees down there and not having to travel so far. Absolute weakness.
Just a touch of cynicism there.
Welcome back, David.
Yeah,
I don't recognise you when you're not off the tree.
Back.
If you get a chance, have a look at Matthew Lloyd's critiquing of St Kilda's last quarter and the highlight vision of their performance as well. Judge, it makes for ugly watching.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, let's go from a tale of woe to a tale of joy and change codes. Paul, when was the last time you were celebrating a State of Origin victory where New South Wales scored 50 points?
Well, I normally watch the matches walking around like a death row inmate. I'm that nervous, but I still maintain that because I'm also superstitious. So I still didn't take my seat until the end. I thought I was dreaming. I thought I was sleepwalking because I wasn't expecting even our man Tom Trebojevic, who was tipped to all the listeners, to go over for 3. So I was just stunned, and it was just one of those games where everything went right. We had players out of position. Tom Trebojevic, not only was he not out of position, he did everything but pop up and selling the nuts in the grandstand because he was everywhere on that field and he was just on fire. And you've never seen a more clear-cut man of the match. Latrell Mitchell played an outstanding game. And afterwards, in the press conference, there's been women watching The Notebook who didn't look as close to tears as Daly Cherry Evans. He was absolutely devastated in those sheds. So, and Paul Green, welcome to Origin. That was his first as a coach. Couldn't have gone much worse. It's equivalent to actors. They say break a leg. It's like he did break a leg because he would just be shell shocked. So all we can hope though, and the betting market actually shows it, is that to keep the series alive, that Queensland are I think $2.90 for game 2, which is at Suncorp. So that they'll find something. Don't worry about that. But that performance was as good as you'll see from any New South Wales team ever, or any team ever. Everything worked. The Panthers players, it's quite a nice story that a lot of those Panthers players are juniors from one of the more disadvantaged areas of Sydney, Mount Druitt. Jerome Luai was outstanding. Brian Torhor, that's my best pronunciation. he used his money from the game to put a deposit down to buy his parents a house. So you can't get a much better rugby league story than that, which is a nice touch. He looked like he'd been playing Origin for 10 years, Brian Toho. He was just outstanding on the wing. Queensland still, though, have Cameron Munster to play. They'll be okay in game 2. I think a much closer game in game 2. We'll see.
Paul Hayter is 290 a bit under the odds for Queensland after. How does the side come back from a 50-6 thrashing?
Because they've won 10 of the last 11 series. And I've been cocky many years where we've had a win and then it's all come back in my face. Not just an egg, but a pie and sauce into the face as well. So I'm not getting cocky or carried away. They'll be a completely new team for game 2, Queensland. I think they'll work out a way to defend better. They've got big Josh Papali back. One of the reasons that the backs did their job is one of my favourite sayings, the forwards were going forward. We won the battle of the middle with the big men. And we have the speediest, as I said, more speed than the Jamaican relay team in our back 5. And they run amok because there was holes everywhere. So I think that the Queensland pride will be on the line. And I think that they will come out and I can't say Queensland will win it, but it'll be a much closer contest. I can guarantee you that.
Paul,
hard not to be.
Paul,
Yeah, nice.
the difference is so great. I've got this expression, which might sound silly, but you can't run faster than you can run. You can only go as hard as you can go. And it seemed to me that Brisbane, the Queensland team wasn't holding back. They were just absolutely shell-shocked and beaten by a better team. Given the way that these things go, that it'll pretty much be, I imagine, the same teams face each other in a pretty short period of time. Seriously, what could happen between now and then to make a change?
I'll tell you what's happening. One of the best players in the game, Kalen Ponga, will be back at the number 1 role. Now, number 1 is so important because Billy Slater used to run that team from the back. So Kalen Ponga will be taking charge of the defence from the back, telling his people where to be. And as I said, Josh Papali, one of the best big men in the game, will be returning as well. But they will find a way to defend better and to try and block the influence of Tom Trbojevic. Someone might have a taser gun on the field. I don't know. I don't know how you could stop one of the most individual performances. The scary thing for Queensland, they had 8-1 set restarts in their favour, 8-1. They had more tackles in New South Wales 20-metre zone than New South Wales had in their zone. That is scary reading for a Queensland fan if they're listening. So I just put a big stock on spirit. And that Suncorp Stadium is the best stadium in the country. It seats 3 times as many people as the Queenslanders that were there in Townsville. The Townsville track was fast, incredibly fast, which suited us down to a T. So this is going to be a heavier surface, if Gelding wants that phrase. And I just think there'll be 60,000 rabid Queenslanders there, and that will be enough for them to find something.
Latrell. We've talked about how good Tommy T was. What about Latrell in the backs?
Oh, it's fantastic, just electric as well. And there was so much space for him to move in. They're going to have to find a way. There's talk about bringing Will Chambers back, ex-Storm player, and he will be much better defensively than what they had. I mean, yeah, I could have been better defensively than some of their players. So they're going to. Brains Trust has got a couple of weeks to get it all together. And any team that features Kalen Ponga and Cameron Munster, who would be in the top 5 of the game, there's going to be something there. And we've talked about Harry Grant many times. So those 3 players will ensure this game 2 is a contest. Combined with, I think there's more pride in that jersey than any jersey in the land, any team. Queensland, they'll find something.
Paul, the issue Queensland has is that if they bring back Will Chambers, that addresses one part, but Dane Gagai and Capewell the other night were just hopeless in defence and then offered nothing in attack. The problem also with Queensland was that Cherry Evans isn't a leader. Like, no matter what people say, he's captain of the team, but the other night his kicking game was so poor and his decision-making at times was just, it was club standard rather than actually what Origin needed. But then they talk about bringing Ben Hunt in. It just seems like the shuffling of deck chairs.
Well, they're doing what
Well,
New
they've
South
gotta
Wales
do
used to do,
something.
is changing all the time. Whereas Queensland had the chemistry and stuck with their vision. You make a good point about Cherry Evans. It might be like Buckley was accused of as a player, not necessarily a leader. His style was, I'll play like I'm the best player ever, and you guys will try and replicate it, as opposed to inspiring and uniting those around him. Yeah, I understand what you're saying about being a leader. Now, I think he just plays well and he's surrounded by enough talent. Hello, Cameron Munstead, Kalen Ponga, Harry Grant, that he can look like he's a good leader. But in terms of being inspiring, I guess you'd put it down to his deeds on the field. I still think he's a very talented player. He inspired Manly to a massive win, albeit over just the Cowboys, but they've been playing some good football. So he bounced back, Cherry Evans. He'll be cherry ripe, excuse the pun, for game 2.
And
What about the Munster coming back will certainly be a big difference. Do they need Cameron Smith back to lead them, Queensland?
Well, he was there Munster game 1. He'll be there game 2. He'll find something more. Cameron Smith boots are hung up and he's not going to join those Titans. Professor and I have talked about this. If the Titans were a chance of winning the premiership, he'd love to come back and get them over the line. But there is much chance of winning the premiership as me not saying another word this show.
the other thing you mentioned Munster, but both Munster and Grant hadn't played a competitive game for 3 to 4 weeks, so they'll be much better for the run. But if we go off Origin a little bit and we start talking about the normal round that we're playing at the moment, doesn't it show how good the Storm have been over the last 10 to 12 years that they were able to win matches during Origin period? We're seeing Penrith at the moment decimated by people playing Origin, but nothing more than the Storm were. And they've lost 2 in a row now.
I did tip the Sharks to win that to those who listened. So that wasn't a massive shock. It shows, and when I said that Penrith would win the flag, that was on the basis they kept their team intact. It does show that without Cleary and Luai as 6 and 7, they're not as good a team. Matt Burton was very impressive. He's off to the Bulldogs next year, so it gives Professor some hope. But it's that combination of Cleary. That was quite a question mark on Cleary. He had the blood spilling out of the cheek and it was spilling out. He'd go off to get treated. I don't know who the doctor was, but he'd come back with more blood spurting out than when he went off. So his jersey looked about the colour of your shirt, Coutta, by the end of the match. So whoever the doctor was wasn't too good on stitches when they taught that at medical school.
Well, he was told to go out the back, get it fixed, and then came back, play, go out the back, get it fixed, got 2 warnings, and then reluctantly went off, but came back on and the blood was still flowing. It's like Peter from Racing New South Wales couldn't be happy with that look, could he?
Oh, they liked the blood for the game, perhaps, but he maybe they just rubbed the Vaseline on it. It was like he'd had a shark bite out of his cheek. It was Tom Drabojevich's elbow. He's in everything, Tommy. He even knocking out his own players.
Paul, can I just ask, general comment, the Polynesian players, is that rugby league's gain to rugby union's loss? It just seems to me that they're amazing athletes, the Polynesian players, and the sort of players you'd expect to see in a union game, but they just seem to be becoming more prominent in the league game. Is it just my observation, or is that something that's becoming a thing now?
Oh, it's always been there. I mean, they athleticism as well, same as our Indigenous players, is just a different level. But that Brian Toho on the wing, you'd think he'd been playing for 10 years, and then Jerome Luai in the halves. So if you've got New Zealand heritage, then you're not playing Origin. So when I say it's the best players, the only ones missing are obviously the English players and the Kiwi players as such. There's a lot of Indigenous players elect to play for New Zealand. And Maori players, of course, playing for New Zealand. So they don't feature, but we get the best of the rest. But you're certainly right. Is those eligible? I mean, Brian Toho and Luai were raised in Mount Druitt in Penrith, so their first club football was there, as opposed to being in New Zealand, which would make them, if that's where they were from, whoever we're talking about, that would be ineligibility for Origin. It's where you play your first club football. So there's a lot of Kiwis that we'd love to see in Origin, but they played over there first.
All right, Paul. Not much to talk about in the rest of the round. Roosters getting a 1-point win over Titans. Your Bunnies beating the Knights, and the Knights forms all over the place. And the Raiders finally getting a win against the Broncos.
Yeah, well, the Knights were gone when one of the best player names in rugby league, Bradman Best, he went off. So the Rabbits weren't at their best, excuse the pun. But when Bradman went off, that pretty much the innings was over there. Excuse me, I can't do much more with that analogy. But the Rabbitohs won. They weren't fantastic. The Raiders got on board. It shows how bad the Broncos are. Carmichael Hunt was back. That's how desperate the Broncos are. They'll be asking Alan Langer to get out of the yellow vest and into a jersey soon, the way they're going, the Broncos. So we'll see what happens there. Manly, good to see them back. Schooner will be happy. They're in the top 4, Professor. So unexpected. Probably the most surprising team this year is Manly. And then we lead into today's games. We've got the Warriors over $5 against the Storm, so we don't have to say much more there about what they're expecting. Nico Hines playing out of his skin. Shame for Storm fans that he is gone. But there's a guy called Pappenhausen who ties in with our concussion regular discussion. He's been out for quite a while, Pappenhausen. I haven't heard there's more to that than meets the eye, but he's been out a long time for a concussion. Not quite as long as Buddy Franklin was out with that minor hamstring strain, which went on for about 9 months. That's a different issue. And then we've got the Eels, $1.25 against the Tigers. So I think that'll be closer than what people are expecting. The Tigers have won 4 of their last 6, and they beat the Panthers last week. So I actually think that'll be a close game this afternoon for those watching, and I might be in that group.
So Warriors Storm, give us a final score.
Storm they should beat them 26-10. But those watching that game, there's a guy called Reece Walsh, who's a superstar for the Warriors at fullback. He'll be worth watching just for his battle against Nico Hines. But the Storm should be too good there, 26-10. I've got that down at.
And Eels Wests?
I'll be watching that in a pub somewhere. I think that'll be close, probably 18-14 to the Eels. I've got that down as.
And Queen's Birthday Monday game. My Bulldogs taking on the St George Dragons. Any joy for me tomorrow, do you think?
You get a day off work. That's about it. Yeah. I looked at your halves, Wakeman and Avarillo, and up against
that Rick?
Yeah,
Rick
Jake, I think it is. Another great name. The Dragons just be too strong in the halves, and they've got Cameron McCulloch from the Broncos. And at the back, we've got don't be a Nufty, back Matt Duffy. So that petition's gaining strength to keep him at the club, but the coach has said he doesn't want him. I think the petition could be thicker than the white pages, and they still wouldn't keep him there.
All right.
Unfortunately for poor old Matt Duffy.
And the other thing, Professor, is we can't look over, as the show does, but we can't look over the expansion of the NRLW.
Yes.
Yep.
So having currently 4 clubs at the moment, they include the Warriors, but
3 clubs for you, Curtis. Sorry, 3.
Just 1 second, please give me a moment. Thank you. Is that the Warriors won't be participating next year?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, though, Paul. That's good to see you stop talking. So what will happen is the Broncos, Dragons and Roosters and the Warriors did form the 14 competition. The Warriors will drop out for next year, and we'll expand to the Titans, Knights and Eels making a 16 competition. And then in 2022, Paul, they're looking to expand to 8 teams. So on the horizon, and I would say it's well overdue.
Well, it's great to see. I mean, we talk regularly about the Gold Coast, the fastest growing area of the country, and it hasn't had a great sporting team. Wouldn't it be great to see a women's team go well from there? I regularly talk about Newcastle. It's up there with Geelong as one of the best sporting cities in the country. And it's good for them to get a team. And as for the Eels, well, that's in Western Sydney with 3 million people without a women's team. So all of those 3 expansions are well thought out. What I like as well is that they're going to play these games as a double header with the NRL, which I think the AFL should consider as well. It's not that the comp doesn't stand alone. It just gives them some exposure while it's in its infancy. And each team plays each other once and then the finals. So it's going from 4 to 7 weeks. So you've got more teams, more football, more people, more interest. So it's a great thing for the game.
Paul, one of the features of AFLW was that women's football in Victoria and the rest of Australia is very popular, and a lot of women are playing it. We don't talk much about it, but that's where the revolution's really happening, is the grassroots. Are you able to say what the grassroots following of women's rugby league is?
I can only say it would hopefully grow. It doesn't get a lot of press attention at all, unfortunately, similar to the AFL side, but you'd have to think that it would lead to more participation, particularly those three areas, Newcastle, Gold Coast, Parramatta area. We'd be talking about a combined 6 million people. So now have a team. So that can only be good for that area, that the young girls growing up, sportingly gifted girls can see that there's a pathway through to play in their area, which is often important rather than watching teams from elsewhere.
And Paul, you talked about the Newcastle Knights. They are one of the most passionate sporting communities within Australia. And you really do love to see them sort of put forward. Obviously, at the moment, they're struggling a little bit on the men's side and with some injuries. But going forward, you could see them becoming a real power, I think, as a club in the whole, because we don't separate them now. They're both one club going forward.
It was very similar to what I always say about Geelong. You really meet someone from Geelong who doesn't go for the Cats, and you'll rarely find someone from the Knights, or the Newcastle area, who doesn't go for the Knights. So it is fantastic for the game.
Sarah, I might call you in there. The NRL have decided that, as Paul said, the women's games will be played as double headers with the men's games. Hearing that, and with a comparison to AFLW, what were your thoughts about hearing that sort of idea rather than what the AFL are doing?
I personally loved it. As we've spoken about on the show before, double headers in the AFL and AFLW to support the women's game would be absolutely amazing. But I think this gives a really great opportunity for female fans of the NRL to get on board and maybe even see that there's now elite pathways and more developed teams for them to play through to. And it supports everyone all the way down to grassroots. So even if there's not a massive group of females participating in grassroots NRL, there's now opportunities where they can see that there's an elite level, and the same as what's happened in the AFLW. People are going to see that and follow through, and we're going to see some really great talent coming through in the next 10, 20 years once those pathways are really solidly developed. So it's a really great opportunity to promote the game and more females given more opportunities to participate in sport.
Paul, would you think that as part of this, and going on further from what Sarah's talking about, that we've been very successful when it comes to the rugby union sevens? If we look at Olympics and Commonwealth Games and the like, and you can mention players like Charlotte Hislop and these sorts of people, you could see more of them becoming rugby league players, couldn't you?
You could, yeah. I used to joke it's a simple game for simple people, but we all know in here it's not that simple. I'd just much easier explain rugby league to a new fan than I would rugby union. So it is a game where you can excel, and there are pathways there. The appeal of union and why, for example, Tavasa Sheck at the Warriors, it's to play for the All Blacks is always a dream for a Kiwi, and the international appeal of union is more than league. But in terms of the pathways here, this bolstering of the women's tournament certainly would show there's a pathway there as opposed to union for the women's side of the coin.
Okay,
Professor, going back to the point of playing the women's game before the men's game, and what Sarah said, we've been calling out for that for the AFLW to be doing that for almost 2 years. Isn't it just common sense, really? Like,
You'd think
to
so
me,
at
it
this
just
point.
sounds, it's so logical. Let's have this game. It doesn't matter who's first or who's second, but just play them together for the fans. And it'll grow women's football. It's common sense.
Going further from that, Gelding and the like, is that I don't think we'll ever see crowds go back to what they were attending matches. So we may not go back to having 100,000 or 60,000, 70,000. So isn't it the right time to actually go, well, we're going to play double headers and actually get 50,000 people there that, like, you know what I mean? I think that it's well,
before this lockdown, we were getting 50,000 to the men's game again at the MCG. And what would be better than, say, Melbourne's women's side that was fighting out for a flag, and now you have Melbourne senior side, possibly contending for a flag. The MCC members, you wouldn't be able to move in, would you? That'd be full every week.
I used to like back when
we do like a good winner.
Well, back before I had kids, when I actually saw games, I used to love getting there for reserve grade. Because you'd see some of the young players coming through, and you'd have an eye on someone that could be a star in the future. I think it'd be amazing. So I've got a mate actually who used to go to all 3 grades, or so his wife thought, because she said to one of his mates, "Isn't it great he sees all 3 games? He's passionate about his Bulldogs." His mate said, "What do you mean? We go to the pub. We only get there for first grade." So that put a hole in that argument. But I did used to like getting there at the Sydney Football Stadium, watching the Rabbitohs reserves, seeing some young players coming through, getting the match book out and making notes. But this would be great to have the women's game leading straight in to the next game with not massive breaks. So you're getting people arriving there early for a reason, and they're seeing the end of the match, the exciting part.
All right, we might move on. It's a great segue to AFLW, and the trade period finished during the week. Sarah, who are the winners and losers?
Biggest winner by far seems to be Melbourne. They've picked up some great recruits with Taylor Harris, another amazing marquee player for them, and Liv Purcell, and they've confirmed that Daisy Pearce is going to be playing another year. So Melbourne just seem to have really stacked everything up, and they seem to be really prepared for the coming season. Even GWS has done quite well. They've picked up Chloe Dalton from Carlton, who's currently in Tokyo preparing to hopefully win another gold in the NRL Sevens or the Rugby Sevens. Jasmine Grierson from North Melbourne, and Katie Loynes from Carlton as well. So some really great pickups. There was a few clubs that didn't pick up any recruits throughout the trade period, but we're, I guess, going to have to see how everyone goes. It seems that Carlton probably hasn't done the best if they've lost a lot of players. Taylor Harris, Jess Hoskins following her sister to Richmond, Alison Downey, Jess Edwards, and Winnie Lang were all delisted. So they've had a lot of outs at the moment. So it seems to be a bit of a switch where Carlton were very prepared going into the 2020 season. They've fallen back a little bit with their trade preparation. So maybe they're looking at picking up a few draft picks. They've got 10, 11, 23 and a few more, I believe. But Melbourne have by far been kicking goals with the trade period. It was amazing.
Was Richmond the biggest losers, giving everyone away?
No, not the biggest losers yet. They've done pretty well so far. I mean, they've lost obviously some amazing players and marquee players, as we were talking about on the show last week. But they've picked up Jess Hosking. They've got Poppy Kelly from St Kilda and Maddie Shevlin from Collingwood, who swapped for Sabrina Frederick. Some great young talent. I guess they've just got to see how they capitalise on it, and hopefully they can use their draft picks to maybe fill a few voids they've lost with their trade period.
Sarah, I just noticed from those figures then, the 23 players, salary cap of $478,000 means the average player is earning just over $20,000. Now, firstly, do you think that's adequate? And secondly, does it include marketing costs and income from external, such as a club puts up a Taylor Harris as a face of the club for which he earns $100,000? You may not know this, but I wonder if that comes to the salary cap.
I don't believe it does, because it comes under almost like a marketing job. It's like they're employed into 2 different roles by the same organisation.
Yep.
So Taylor Harris was getting around $20,000 a year at Carlton, but I think she was getting another $60,000 a year with all of the marketing and publicity that she would do with Carlton. She probably was getting a little bit more. But her partnership with Colgate as the female representative of the Smile of the AFLW, I think it was called, she got a bit of income from that. And there's other players who have very similar situations as well, where they continue media appearances after the AFLW season and at AFL matches or at AFL events, club publicity. They're participating in photo shoots. There's a lot more that goes on a bit behind the scenes, especially for those marquee players. So it's, as we've said now, on AFL membership cards, there's usually an AFL and AFLW player on the cover of those membership cards. So I think for Richmond, we were talking about last week, Monique Conti was on there. She'd be getting a little bit more money for her marketing role. But I think how they're kind of working it is they're employing the players as players, but also as media personalities almost to kind of cover that marketing side of what they do for the club.
So the first question, $20,000, is that about right, do you think, for the average typical AFLW player?
It's hard to say because you'd love to say, obviously we want more money to be invested into these girls so they can dedicate more time to the game and improve the skill of the game. But with the money that they're making, there's been a lot of research deliberation from the AFL Players Association that this is kind of where they're at as the player cap, the salary cap expands and it gets a little bit bigger, you might see it increasing. But at the moment, the 20,000 seems to be the kind of stock standard that we're seeing in women's sport at a level of the money they're generating through media income. But a lot of those marquee players and other players as well are also being paid a little bit, as we talked about before, with a marketing side of it. I'd love to see the girls get paid a bit more now, but for where they're at the moment, 20,000 or maybe a little bit more seems to be what they're getting.
For what it's worth, Sarah, it's a 30% increase in the previous year compared to the AFL players, which is incremental. It's only 5%, whatever. So it is a big jump.
No, it's a big jump. And I think the AFL and the AFLW are coming in with the mindset that they don't want to saturate they don't want to just throw lots of money at the teams, because then the clubs that have more money are obviously going to use it. And that's why we have the salary cap in place, I guess, to make sure that clubs with more money can't just bring in all the best players. But hopefully with the expansion of the competition and as the league gets bigger and bigger, I guess when the other 4 AFL teams who don't have AFL teams become introduced, we might even see another jump in that salary cap.
The Taylor Harris one, for me, has been interesting watching it play out in the media. And it's, so Melbourne were never touted, but obviously they've now signed her. She didn't have many options to go to. Carlton had sort of said, well, you've outpriced yourself. But my understanding is that at Melbourne, she's on the base salary or the salary she's earning, but she's not part of the marketing cap. Now, how does that work? Or is it just that Carlton wanted her gone, Sarah?
I think the tensions between Taylor Harris and Carlton had become quite intense, especially with the news that we've seen recently, the conversations between her and her manager and Carlton. It started looking like there was a point where Taylor was almost going to take a year off of football and maybe come back afterwards because they weren't on the same page with the agreements with Carlton. I'm not 100% sure exactly what's going to happen with Taylor's publicity now that she's at Melbourne. She's already had a few photo shoots now that she's been drafted over there. We've seen some of that content coming out at the moment. But whether it's going to be the same level as what she was doing for Carlton, I'm not 100% sure. It might be something they eventually develop. Maybe they want to support some of the players they've already got there. They've got some amazing names already there that have done a lot of publicity. Daisy Pearce, Karen Paxman have done a lot of stuff. Maybe they're going to slowly introduce her into the kind of big names of the team. But it might just be something we have to wait and see once we get to the AFLW season. Yeah,
it's and of course we talked Melbourne a bit on this show, but Karen Paxman signed a 2-year contract, so she's probably getting better with age.
Oh, definitely. She seems to be maturing like a fine cheese. She just keeps getting better. It seems to be that every time she runs out, she does something even more amazing. And I've always thought prior to her having quite a good year this year and getting a haircut that seems to have put her on the map, I thought she was one of the most underrated players in the AFLW the first couple of seasons, because a lot of people talked about some really big names like Daisy Pearce and Taylor Harris, but not everyone was talking about Karen Paxman. So it's amazing to see that she's getting a lot of recognition, which is really well deserved.
And I've always said the best mullet this side of the Tiger King.
Exactly.
And the final point, Sarah, was that the Taylor Harris trade, I think, involved 5 clubs.
Yeah, there was a lot of moving around with the swaps going on there. And there was initially they were talking about trading either to Melbourne or St Kilda, seemed to be the 2 clubs that were in the mix for everything. But there was a big tie-up between Carlton. I believe GWS was involved in there a little bit as well. I couldn't be 100% sure who was involved, but it was being called the big swap. It was all over AFLW media and a few independent media channels as well. Everyone was keeping an eye on it, but it's definitely created probably the biggest shake-up in the trade period was the swapping going around, this swap that included Taylor Harris.
Sarah, you talked about the Blues. They lost Taylor Harris to Melbourne, Chloe Dalton and Katie Loynes to Greater Western Sydney, and Jess Hosking to Richmond, with Jess Hosking asking the day before the trade period closed to go to Richmond. So it would just seem to me that, like people leaving a sinking ship, the Blues might not do all that well next season.
No, there's been a few speculations around the players that they've lost. I know Taylor Harris was the big one, a lot of people talking about that, but that stemmed from her conversations about payment. Jess Hosking going to play with her sister at Richmond. A lot of people think that she might have missed playing with her sister, or she wanted a new change of environment. Maybe it was a little bit that she thought her time at Carlton was over and it was time to move on. But I'm sure she's going to have another great year over there playing with her sister. Chloe Dalton is originally from Sydney, so I believe she's moving home, wanting to get a bit closer. She took a bit of time off to focus on preparing for the Olympics this year. So it'll be good to maybe see her being able to train and combine that with the GWS talent up there, which they've had an amazing draft period. And Katie Loynes, I'm not 100% sure if she's originally from the Sydney area, but that's probably the one that I wouldn't know as much about. There's some interesting reasons behind why players are leaving, but I think they've just realised that their time at Carlton's over and it's time to move on. Whether it's a sinking ship or not, I couldn't say though, because they still might have some potential coming through in the draft with a few reasonably high draft picks, but we'll just have to see how they go.
Okay, Sarah, thanks for that. Coutta, French Open is...
Professor, can I...
Yes.
Some breaking news at Edenhope.
Yes.
Race 3 has been run and won, led all the way. Sportsfan's own Craig Robertson got up on Tarakan, paying $10.90 and $2.70 the place.
What a day out for Robbo.
For Robbo. So he's if you're following Robbo today, you're certainly in front. I wish he was riding something in race 8, but the way the track's playing, Professor, couple of leaders have won, so it may not suit us in race 8.
Okay.
I missed that tip. Did we get the tip on or not? No.
The way you broke in there, Gelding, I think you might have had some of your hard-earned on that.
Professor was speaking to Robbo during the week, I understand.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was. All right.
He's not saying much, is he, boys?
No, he's not.
He's just tucked into that pub behind him for a beer.
Yeah.
I think he's just ordered some lobster.
Yeah, Coutta, the French Open, some joy for Australia with Dylan Alcott taking out his 3rd consecutive French Open. He's got 2 legs of the Grand Slam. Can he get all 4?
I don't see why not. His performances have been dominant. So may not have won the doubles this time around, but his performances have been nothing short of sensational. So, yeah, Dylan was our shining light when we talk about the Australians at the French Open. I actually don't know why we turn up to the French Open as a nation. It's a horrible tournament. The French aren't the best spectators going around either. So Roger Federer, as much sort of said similar. He actually forfeited his match because he wanted to prepare for Wimbledon. Staggering stuff, but Roger.
They're always very well dressed, the fans, I've noticed, at the French Open. Nice scarves, the Polo Ralph Lauren type stuff. There's no hooligans there.
No, that's right. And
yeah, but what about the fast when they halfway during the game, everyone's playing and they said, "Oh no, it's 10:30 because of COVID. Everyone's got to go home." And you stop a game for 10 minutes. Why?
and of course,
the
Gelding,
crowd out.
and of course, Gelding. That was during the Nadal Djokovic match as well. So Australia was criticised heavily for having that done in the Australian Open this year, with a couple of matches going past midnight, but the French have done it as well. So
in the female side, which had the final last night, of course, two players who A, I've never heard of, and B, I'm not sure I can pronounce their names, one a Czech, one a Russian.
Yep.
The winner was unseeded.
Mm-hmm.
That's the third time that's happened in the last 5 French Opens.
Mm.
The runner-up was seeded 31. It was a 52nd major. When you say Australians can't win it, it sounds like anybody can win it.
But you've got to be able to play matches in a row. So if you look at the Australians as an example, and now Ash obviously suffered an injury early on in the tournament, but you've got to be. I think the girl that's won it. So the girl that's won, and this is here you go. You'll love this, Judge. Is she's actually playing in the doubles final tonight?
Absolutely.
Now she's won the French Open doubles a couple of times.
Twice, yep.
But Nadal played. The last time Nadal played doubles at a major was 2005.
How about Federer? The same thing, wouldn't it?
Similar. So there's no money in doubles, so don't play it. But Krejcikova or whatever.
The Woodies would say something different than that. They did quite well out of doubles.
Yeah, because good players didn't play.
And not when you can win 4.5 million playing singles in a tournament. But yeah, she won last night and dedicated it to one of tennis's great ladies, Jana Novotná, a St Kilda supporter, I believe.
That's rough. You're talking about the great choke of Wimbledon of whatever year it was, of course.
However, the winner's record in singles makes for interesting reading, John. 38 and 28 win-loss record. And she's now on a Grand Slam.
Yeah.
So the French Open is hard watching, Professor. I just think that it's a tournament that every 2 weeks of the year you sort of might take some interest in it. But what you're really looking forward to is you're looking forward to seeing the green grass of Wimbledon and lead up tournaments like your Queens or your Nottingham and the like. So
Coutta, should we be worried about Ash Barty with Wimbledon just around the corner? The Italian Open, she retired with a right arm injury. French Open, retires with a hip injury. So in the last 2 tournaments, she succumbed to injury. She's only just got back into it, so it's not as if she's had a very strenuous lead up to these matches.
It'd be interesting because is it the conditioning, and we talked about the time off from COVID, is it the conditioning of not playing competitive matches that's contributed to this? I would hope she's right for Wimbledon because it's still the best tournament or the best of the Grand Slams, like no matter what people say, that Wimbledon is the one they want to win. And for us as Australians, we'd love to see her win Wimbledon. So hopefully she's right for it. But at the same time...
Well, is that the problem? Because that league has been heavily bandaged in every event that she's basically played in.
Yeah.
I can't remember her not wearing a heavily bandaged leg.
Well, that sort of seems to be the injury that women's tennis has the most, because you watch a lot of the women, and even last night, the girl that came runner-up, Pavlyuchenko, she had that bandage high up on her thigh late in the second set. So I just hope that Ash, recovers properly, because she has committed to the season, Professor. Unlike Nick Kyrgios has said that he won't play until and he probably won't play this year. But Ash is certainly committed to playing tennis overseas for the entire year. So we hope that 1, she recovers, and 2, we'd love to see her go deep at Wimbledon.
Could to round off the Naomi Osaka thing, which we've been speaking about the last 2 weeks, as I say, sports run by idiots. Can I just get a leader for the idiotic statement of the year by the French tennis president? defending their stance against Naomi Osaka, the goal of fining her was not to penalise her. The goal was to say, here's the rule. I would have thought that's exactly what they're trying to do, was to penalise her, because they did so, and they threatened to penalise her more every single game that she refused to go to a press conference.
And he said that they would have continued to fine her in no uncertain terms.
In greater numbers. So
Yeah.
of course they are penalising her. That's what that is what the rule does. So yeah.
Are press conferences, are they worth any grain of salt at all, press conferences? Like, Paul, you could probably talk about your great mentor in Wayne Bennett here, who was interviewed by, I think, one of the better sports journalists in Matty Russell last night. And he gave him, before the game, he gave him one-word answers. So what are we hoping to get out of these press conferences? Are we looking to get a cracker of a comment or something on the gun? What are we hoping to get out of press conferences?
Well, the
We
one after
discussed all this
Origin
last
with
week.
Jerry Evans close to tears and Paul Green looked like he'd been hit by an emotional truck, I quite enjoyed that. I might have rewatched it. I might have, because given we lost 10 out of 11 in a row, I might have watched it more than 3 times. I enjoyed it. And that was real emotion on show. And I liked seeing it. I liked seeing Jerry Evans. Not that I'm sadistic. I liked that his heart was on his sleeve and he looked like he was about to burst into tears. So he would have liked to have been anywhere else than at that press conference. But you do sometimes get some insights from the coaches, from the players. But the losing press conferences, I do agree, you don't get a lot out of. And the winning press conferences, I think the game has pretty much spoken for itself. You can see who played well. You watched it. You can see what they did that worked.
The last post-game interview of any note to a journalist in AFL was Teddy Whitten after a State of Origin match saying, "We stuck it up them." That is the only post-match comment I've ever remembered from any sport, certainly AFL. They're a waste of time.
Well, the best post-event comment, of course, was Bob Hawke. Anyone who sacks his worker for not coming in today is a bum, but not everyone can sort of have that latitude in the post-match or post-event conference.
All right.
There was
we did discuss this last week, and the famous comment was someone from America who turned up to one and said, "I'm only here so I don't get fined."
Yeah.
And that describes the post-match interviews.
The A-League finals are on at the moment, Professor. I'm not sure that anyone knows that, but anyway, it's just being hidden away. Last night, Andy Harper interviewed Alan Stadgic, who's the coach of the Central Coast Mariners, straight after the game and asked him what he'll be talking to the owners about next season. So straight after the game, he's actually asked, what do they need to improve on for next year? What he'll be asking the owners for to help them improve next year. And Alan Stadgic just gave the straight bat and said, "Listen, I'm not sure it's the right time to be talking about those things. We'll let this sink in." I'm thinking, what a waste of a press conference. What a waste of an interview.
Yeah. All right.
If we didn't have after-match press conferences, we wouldn't have got Raymond Domenech, who headed the French football team, saying, "I don't believe in superstitions. They only bring bad luck." We would have been denied that.
Yeah, Coutta, men's singles final tonight. Djokovic against Tsitsipas. Who will win it and why?
Hard to go past Djokovic tonight after beating Nadal and being Nadal quite convincingly. Tsitsipas got through his Zverev in a pretty tight match. So, yeah, I think you go Djokovic, and I wouldn't surprise me if it was in straight sets tonight. But I would say it's probably going to be 3-1. Djokovic might drop the first, but then win the next 3. And Djokovic goes on his merry way, which is great for all real good sports fans, isn't it? We'd love to see him winning.
All right, Coutta, thanks for the wrap on the French Open. Now, headlines during the week that Adam Goodes, 300-plus game player for the Sydney Swans and a Brownlow medalist, declined the AFL's offer to become part of the Hall of Fame. I noticed that doing some reading on it, the AFL on their website seemed to up the ante and double down. Their headline for it was AFL Chief responds to Adam Goodes Hall of Fame snub. Now, I was interested in the word they used, snub. Snub, defined as rebuff, spurn disdainfully. I don't think there's anything that Adam Goodes has done that can be described like that, yet the AFL seems to have doubled down on the problem that they've got. I can't see, how will wounds be healed if the AFL doesn't hold an olive branch out here, Judge?
Yeah, because the AFL are run by idiots too, Professor, just like tennis. He hasn't done anything of the kind. I was thinking about this and thinking about giving a comment. Rarely, I won't give a comment because in respect to Goodes, he didn't say anything. He just did not take up the offer of the AFL Hall of Fame. As a result of that, the AFL says it's a snub. Well, bugger you, AFL. He's quite entitled to have his opinion, and he's quite entitled to keep his opinion to himself. If he wishes to take it up, so be it. But there could be a multitude of reasons, which we don't know about because he hasn't said anything, why he won't take up the offer of AFL Hall of Fame. But it's not for the AFL to assume what his motives are or what he's saying by that. And it just reminds me of the whole way the AFL treats Goodes during his career, in particular the latter part of his career. So if I was the AFL, I'd shut up about this because Adam Goodes has not said anything.
Coutta, any comment?
The AFL Hall of Fame, it's an interesting concept in itself, isn't it? Adam Goodes was booed at the end of his career, and we've all talked about that previously. And it's a disappointing way, obviously, for him to end. What he did for Aboriginal or the Indigenous awareness as a player, winning Brownlows, but also everything else he did off field has been tremendous and huge. And it's disappointing that we're at this stage where we're discussing the use of the term snub, but he just hasn't accepted his nomination. Isn't it just that simple?
Yeah.
I think it's, again, and this is where we've talked about this previously, Rob, is a number of people involved in the AFL media have to somehow come up with an exclusive or come up with a different viewpoint to be able to get clickbait or whatever you want to call it. So what we should be doing is we should be putting it on on the AFL here to understand what they're going to do to get Adam Goodes to, one, either accept a position in the Hall of Fame going forward, or if not, how do we get him to actually understand why he said no?
Why keep raising it? Isn't another point to be, they've offered him to be in this Hall of Fame, which they do that. For his own reasons, he's decided not to be in it and refused it. He didn't snub it or anything like that. He just refused it. If he doesn't want to be on it, that's fine. It's been offered, it's been refused, just move on. But why keep raising it and re-raising it? Don't you just rehash, something like it's an award that's been offered, it's been refused. Guys, let's just all move on.
Was that word snub, Professor, was that from a journalist? Because I actually read something quite conciliatory from the AFL about it, understanding that it's his decision and stating that it's not something that they should or could take offence to. They understand his reasons.
Yes. That was Coutta, the commissioner, said that. Professor, can I just make one comment that my life experience is that the bigger and more bureaucratic an organisation becomes, the less, the further they are from understanding their people. And I think the AFL is just becoming a massive bureaucracy. You should look at their levels of officials. They've got an official for everything. And I think they're becoming far too bureaucratic and far less understanding of the culture of the game and the culture of their people. Now, that's not saying anything on Adam Goodes. I just make that as a general comment. And to me, it's becoming more and more of a worry.
Too many cooks, is there? Much like Donald Trump having a minister for women, yeah? Too many people with irrelevant titles.
Yeah.
Gelding, just going back on your point, I think I agree with what you said, but I also think what this is highlighting is that we've got so far to go with the education around the Indigenous players and the like. Now, if Adam's chosen not to accept it, so be it. But I think and social media, it's just.
Well, I'll just hold you up on that, Coutta, because people Michael Long, Michael O'Loughlin, the Riolis, none of them have had any trouble accepting this award and being in the Hall of Fame. It is a choice of Adam Goodes as a man. You know, he's allowed to do that. If he doesn't want to be involved in it, he wants to move away from it. That's all fine. It's not. There's plenty of Aboriginal Gavin Wanganeen's in it in the Hall of Fame. Plenty of Aboriginal players have accepted this award. As we said, Hall of Fames in themselves are interesting criteria, and the way, you know, Gary Ablett and Wayne Carey and that were treated, you know, for other incidents and things like that. But look, this has just been, it's not a nice piece of history for the AFL or for football, and it's obviously, there's sourness there between the parties. So, you know, keep on raising it. What good does it do? He's made a decision not to accept it, so just move on. Other players will accept it, and other Aboriginal players will accept it.
Will Gary Ablett accept it if he ever got asked?
Of course he will.
Which he won't get asked.
Yeah.
Sarah,
Is Wayne Carey in the Hall of Fame?
I'm not too sure.
David Neitz isn't.
A bit early.
Gary Lyon isn't, sorry.
Sarah, have you got any thoughts on it?
It's disappointing to see someone who had such a big influence on the AFL just refuse the nomination, but it's completely understandable. I guess he's had a bit of an up and down relationship would be a very quiet way to describe it, but his last couple of years in the AFL would have been extremely painful for him because it was tied in with a lot of things that would have turned a game that I'm sure he played because he loved into something that he dreaded going out there. And there was a really amazing documentary about it, about some of the last couple of games he played and what happened around that. And on AFL 360, I believe they were talking to Eddie Betts about what he thought about Adam Goodes' decision. And Eddie just said that it's, unfortunately, the game for him has been tied in with racism and a lot of really negative things. And it would mean that the positive connotation a lot of us would have for the game, he just doesn't have anymore. And his love for the game would have been lost. There was a lot of horrible things that happened. And the love of the game that would make accepting a Hall of Fame nomination so amazing, it seems that he's lost. So it's completely understandable that he wouldn't really want to go back or reflect on a time where he went through so much horrible things on and off the field.
Thanks, Sarah. Much appreciated. And just in answer to your question, yes, Wayne Carey was inducted into the AFL Hall of Fame in 2010.
Wow.
A long time after he retired, and a lot longer than the 5 years.
Yes. Gelding racing in two venues today in Victoria, Swan Hill and Edenhope, and you've already given us some Edenhope results. What are your thoughts on Swan Hill? I think you had a couple of tips for there.
Yeah, Swan Hill Cup, Professor. The first one we text through for you. Elton Skipper just saluted, paying $1.80, $1.20. Got a bit of better odds than that this morning. But later in the day, a couple that I like, Professor, in race 6, number 11, Kev's Girl, ridden by Damien Thornton. And in the Cup, which is race 8 at 350, we will follow Adelaide Ace, trained by Len Smith and ridden by Dean Yendall, who's ridden the first 3 winners at Swan Hill.
Well, and after the Crows finished last night, that could be an omen bet, Adelaide Ace.
My
Yes.
grandmother's name in London as well, and I don't mind a bit of blackjack, so there's an omen for you.
There's the omen. And of course, Professor, we have an interest going around in race 8 today at Edenhope, but having watched the first 3 races, Professor, seems to be very much a leader's track. And unfortunately, Drop the Mic won't be leading, I don't think.
And you've got a jockey on the horse today who rode a double at Sandown yesterday.
Yeah, Carleen Heffel, an apprentice, replaces Dylan Dunn. Craig Rock, she's in fine form, but again, yesterday rode a double, but of course they were both on horses that led, Professor. So we'd like to see her take up the lead or sit second today, but I think the instructions will be to sit just behind the pace, where they don't seem to be coming from today.
I'll be interested to see how that all goes, Gelding. Thanks very much, panel, for today's discussions. Much appreciated and informative as always. And we'll talk again next week. Good afternoon.
Thanks,
Yeah.
panel. Thanks,
Thank you.
Professor.